Hey there, and welcome to the first complete edit, part 2. In the last section we went over all kinds of really cool stuff, including the Liquify tool, as well as some minor blemish removal. I really like what we did with our shirt, actually. That really did help out quite a bit. Sometimes you don't even notice that stuff until you get in and start doing it. Alright, in this section we're going to show you how to use the frequency separation action that's included with your tutorial, and we're going to be doing some really great retouching work on our subject's face. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is load our action. Let's go up to Window and down here to Actions. Now if you've already loaded the included actions with the tutorial bundle, then you'll see frequency separation 8-bit and 16-bit. If you have not loaded the Florin retouching actions, no big deal. Just grab this little icon here, go down to where you see Load Actions. And here you're going to want to go to Getting Started, and then Actions, and then Florin retouching action. Hit open and it'll load it up right here. Now there's a Florin frequency separation for 8-bit and one for 16-bit. So if you're working in a JPEG, go ahead and click the 8-bit one. If you're working in a TIFF, click the 16-bit. And if you're not sure, just go to Image and go down to Mode, and you can see whether your image is in fact in either 8 or 16-bit. In this case, I got a 16-bit, got a big check mark next to that. So when it comes to frequency separation, I'm going to click on the one that says 16-bit and hit the play button. Alright, it says time to blur skin texture. Adjust the radius slider until you can't see any skin texture. Let's hit continue there, and that looks pretty good. I can't see any skin texture. So let's hit OK there. Alright, now it says done. To work on the skin texture layer, choose frequency separation high frequency, which is HF, and to work on the color, choose LF. Okay, so let's go ahead and open that up, and we'll show you a little bit more about how these actually work. So the high frequency layer, which is this gray layer that you'll see here, this is actually all the texture in the skin. So if I make this invisible, you can see that we don't have any texture. This layer is all the color. So you can see this layer, it actually kind of works as sharpening on top of the other one. So this layer is where the color is, and this layer is where the texture is. Okay. Now let's go ahead and start using it so you guys can see what you actually do. I'm going to zoom in, and I want to take care of this bit of texture here under the eye, where you can see it's kind of like a dimpled skin and things like that. So I'm going to grab my clone stamp tool, S for the clone stamp tool. Okay, we want to make sure that we're on normal mode, and in this case I want to sample just the current layer. I only want to sample this layer, because remember, this layer only has texture on it. So if I want to change the texture of this area to the texture of this area, then I'm going to clone stamp, but I only want it on this layer, okay? I don't need to sample all the other layers too, just this layer. Okay, so clone stamp this layer. Now, I'm going to hold Alt or Option to sample a point, and then I'm going to paint in over a different place. And what it's doing is it's not changing the color of the skin at all, even though I am using a clone stamp tool, because I am on my texture layer. You can see all it's doing is working on the texture. Let's just turn this off and on so you guys can see what it's actually doing there. It's only working on the texture. And a lot of the time, that's all you really need. The texture of a photo is really, you know, when it comes to like small blemishes and like wrinkles and fine hairs and things like that, most of that stuff is recorded in the texture, not the color. Alright, not to say that you can't edit both, but if you do have an issue with texture, this is how you take care of it. You do the frequency separation, and then come in here and just work on the texture of your layer. So in this case, the texture right under your eyes wasn't like so awesome, so we're just kind of going in there and removing it. Actually, you can do the same thing with little, like, these aren't like real wrinkles. This girl's, she's 17 years old, doesn't have much wrinkles yet, but you can go in and remove all that kind of thing. You can even go in and remove things like little hairs, because those show up basically just as texture as well. Alright, if you wanted to get rid of some of these things, you can go in here and remove these as well. So this is again with the clone stamp tool, and I'm just clone stamping right over here. It's just doing a really great job at removing all these little hairs, but not messing with the color of my image. Okay, because the color is on a different layer. There we go. Okay, so anywhere you need to use this to affect your texture, alright, like let's say this area here. Alright, you can go in and change and add texture. Just like that. Alright. Actually looks really good. So let's go ahead and zoom out, and we can see we did in fact change the texture of this area, but now it looks kind of like muddy, right? And that's because the texture is really smooth, but the color is a little bit dark. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a layer in between these. So we have the texture and we have the color, and we're going to use the sample and paint method to kind of clean up and smooth out the skin a little bit. Now, if you remember the sample and paint method, basically you just grab a brush tool, bring your flow down to about 10 or 20%, and then we're going to sample a color and then paint around that area. See, this is what happens if I continue to paint. My texture is still intact, right, because it's this layer right above there. I'm not actually going to do that, but the whole idea is like you sample a color. In this case, I want this little patch here to be lighter. In fact, I want it to be like that color. So I'm going to sample that color, and then I'm going to paint just like lightly on here. I don't need to go overboard. I'm just going to sample that color right there. There we go, and kind of just paint over that area. And it's not going to mess with my texture at all, because my texture is on a totally different layer. Okay, let's do the same thing over here. Let's grab a lighter color and then go ahead and paint on there. So all my freckles and everything's going to stay perfectly intact. I've got skin texture all over my image. We're just able to retouch now. Alright, great, looking good. So let's go ahead and create a new layer, and we're going to start just kind of working on this image as a whole. I'm just going to kind of talk as I go through it. So this is definitely one of those things, the sample and paint technique. You just want to practice it. Basically, sample and paint a little bit, sample and paint a little bit, sample and paint a little bit. It's not like hard by any means, but it does take a little bit of practice to get used to it. Alright, you want to make your brush about the size of the area that you actually want to wind up affecting. And you want to stay at a relatively low flow. That's why I'm somewhere between 10 and 20% for this image. Alright, there we go. Clean up the eyeshadow. If you want to smooth out the transition line between the eyeshadow here and here, just sample this color, paint. I've got a like really nice soft edge brush here too, which really helps with this sort of thing. Alright, we did a really good job smoothing that out. We worked with a great makeup artist who did a really good job smoothing it out to begin with, but a little bit of Photoshop on the top of that never hurts anyone. Alright, there we go. We'll sample this color. So this is kind of like a, I wouldn't say it's like a slow process, but it's definitely something that's not a rushed process, because basically I'm looking at different areas of the skin. Like, you see how this little area is a little dark right around that nose there? Okay, so I'm going to just sample this color here and paint just a little bit on there to kind of like lighten that up. Alright, so this area is a little bit light, so I'm going to grab a color that's a little bit darker, and we're going to paint right over top of that. And that just kind of takes care of that little area. This is like a little bit dark right there, so we're going to grab a lighter space and paint. You see the shadow under her nose, how it's a little dark there? We're going to grab a lighter color, and I'm going to paint right under there. So it's really not supposed to be like incredibly stark. This is not something like, whoa, you just made an amazing change. It's little things. It's like, oh, that's a little bit dark, that's a little bit light, like, let's just get everything to blend together. And that's why it's actually a pretty good idea to be zoomed out, because when you're zoomed in, you lose the forest for the trees, right? Being zoomed out, like, I can see here things I couldn't see before. Like, for instance, see that spot right there? That's kind of like blotchy, isn't it? You know? So let's create a new layer. And again, we're working with layers here, so don't be afraid to kind of play around. So that's a little blotchy, so I'm going to like sample that point there. We're just going to paint that in. Maybe a little bit larger brush. And that'll help take care of that area that's just a little bit blotchy. Alright, so let's make this visible and invisible there. You can see we just kind of like took away the blotchiness. Alright, nice large brush painting with a low flow. It's going to allow us to really just do some beautiful work blending colors here. There we go. Do some on her forehead as well. Alright. So we always start off with like blemish removal, which was like step, 1 in the beginning when we were going in there with the healing brush tool. Because that takes care of all the little guys, and now we're looking, I'm going to zoom out even more. We're looking at more of like a large scale here. Like what is this like, for instance, like do I want a little bit more shading like on the side of her head? So I'm gonna see about adding a little bit of shading by sampling a darker color here and just painting a little bit. Let's turn this off and on. Change this layer blend mode from normal down to darken so it doesn't lighten any of the hair. You can see just like a little bit of shading there. Let's put a little bit over here. This is a lot of what retouching is about. Is like it's not necessarily about just going in and retouching the pores. You wanna go in and like actually affect how light hits a face. Alright, in like a super smooth and nice way. So let's make this layer visible and invisible. You can see how even I'm that zoomed out, I'm just adding a little bit darkness around the edges, and it just adds a little bit more like shape and contour to her face. Alright, that looks pretty good. So let's see the before and the after. Let's zoom in there and see what is this frequency separation thing all about. Let's look at the before and the after. So here's the before and the after. Before and the after. So you can see the after is just a lot cleaner. It's a lot cleaner and smoother. Now, oftentimes you may be like, oh, I overdid it a little bit. You know what? No big deal, guys. Just take this whole entire group and just lower the opacity just a little bit. So it's like you still get the benefits, but the original stuff is still there too. Just in case you're like, I'm always worried about overdoing it. Just lower the opacity. There we go. Looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and do that again. Alright, we're going to just load the action again. You just do this a million times, it doesn't really matter. We'll just do a new frequency retouching, all the same settings and things like that as before. Hit continue there. Alrighty. Alright. There we go. For some reason, this is looking a little bit different. Perhaps I need to make a stamped visible layer in between them. Let's try that. I'll make a new layer in between them and make a stamp visible, and then we'll run another frequency separation. Alright. There we go. You know what? Actually, remember for a minute there I said we just do the frequency separation again. Let's just go ahead and delete those. We don't need to do those again. We'll just continue painting more in between the high frequency and the low frequency. Alright, let's continue painting more. We're going to work on her hands and her body. So let's go ahead and start with her hands and her arms, basically just sampling skin here and painting it in. And this kind of does the same thing as on her face. You know, all the skin texture is going to be intact. It just like simplifies the skin quite a bit, just to like, yeah, maybe you don't need that much detail. Skin detail for sure, but like, do you need that to be that dark? Like, what if I lighten that up a little bit? Is that like a little less distracting? Does it still look like a hand? If it does, then that looks good. Like this sort of stuff right there. I'll just sample that area and paint that in there. Beautiful. Looking good. We'll do the same thing with her neck. You can see it's a little bit blotchy. Alright, so we'll create a new layer. Sample here. Just want to be sure that, like, for instance, if I sample here and start like painting up like that, do something like that, you can see we're pretty quickly like ruining the image, right? So just make sure you're not completely like changing the contour and everything like that of, you know, of a person's body and face, and you know, you still want them to look like them at the end of the day. Just smoothen the skin out. Alright, that looks pretty good. Let's just lighten up the interior of that hand just a little bit. Pretty cool what you can do with a paintbrush, huh? Just the brush tool for like all of this stuff. Yeah. Pretty cool. Alright, let's go ahead and zoom out. There we are. Let's see the before and the after with that. Alright, and if there's anywhere you don't like, just grab your eraser tool and erase it away. Like I didn't like what I did with the neck right there. And then grab your brush tool and just paint it back. Just like do it again. Alright. Cool. Looking great. We're almost done with this part of the body there. Alright. Just want her to have a perfect neck. Alright, beautiful. That looks great. Alright, let's see the before and the after with that. Really nice. Okay, there we go, guys. Alright, that is the end of section 2. Let's go ahead and look at the before and the after from what we've done in section 2 with frequency retouching inner skin. So here's our before and the after. Before and the after. Let's go ahead and take a look at the whole before and after. Here's the before and the after. So she already looked great to start, and she's looking even better and better and better. And you can see we've done a lot of work on her skin. She still has all of her skin texture intact. All of it. 100% of her skin texture is completely intact. There's nothing that's like blurred or removed. It's all the skin texture is there because we use the high frequency layer. Okay, great. We'll see you guys in the next section.